Welcome back to the Q&A, and this is part 3, potentially the last part. Everybody's here, including the dog. We'll see how he is going to fare during, I don't know, maybe an hour, something like that. This might be the last part. I have all the questions there. We'll see how fast it will be depending on all the questions. And as always, if you never watched these, Oh, he's leaving. What is he doing? He's already bored. Where is he? Not behind me laying. Anyway, I read out the questions out loud. So just in case you're only listening to the Q&As, you don't have to watch this. I'm going to read this and then just, answer free-flowing whatever I think. These are always only my thoughts, of course. And that's kind of that. Yeah, it's kind of a Q&A thing, pitching thing. Check out my channel. There's maybe some more stuff that you might like. Maybe not. I don't know. Check around. So these Q&As are usually half an hour to an hour, maybe a bit longer. And let's just get to it. Edson M. He's asking, any thoughts on the current state of 3D animation? Specifically, do you think there are more qualified animators than jobs, or more jobs than animators? Also, do you think working from home will be a realistic option for the industry? I live in Canada but don't want to move to Vancouver. So expensive. But will if need be. Okay, good questions. So any thoughts on the current state of animation? Well, he's going straight into the specifics. More qualified animators than jobs, or more jobs than animators? That's always a bit of a back and forth. I think right now it feels like there are more jobs than animators, mainly because it feels like there are so many projects happening, games and TV and movies, and I don't know. It seems like with the whole working from home and like physical production still being kind of difficult to move on pre-pandemic compared to that. I feel like there's just more animation productions around. I feel like Netflix is definitely pushing hard. So to me, I don't know if that means that now there are more jobs than animators. I feel there are more jobs than before. Subjectively, I could be wrong, just what it feels like. But then I don't know how many qualified animators there are, worldwide and what's going on there. So it's kind of a hard thing to answer. I think generally with the access to like this channel, other channels, Blender, like stuff that's for free, I think the entry barrier, it has changed. There are more people that have access to animation tools that can learn. But that also means that there are more people doing animation that are not that good, dare I say. Just, you can have more people. With more people comes more average work and maybe sub-average work. So I think the qualified animator ratio is still on the smaller side, and then you have mid that's bigger. I think that pyramid is still going to be there. I think there's definitely more competition at the lower level, I would say, because you just check it out online, what people post. There's some really good work there. But again, like the quality goes up every year. Access to material is better every year compared to what was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So I think it's always going to be about the same, where the entry level is growing. There's probably more competition there. And then at the very top, it's still going to be a smaller amount. Because as juniors get better, seniors get better too, the overall quality of movies are getting better in TV shows and games. So it's always going to be, like I said, that pyramid of expectations and quality levels and stuff like that. That would be my subjective thought there. And do you think working from home will be a realistic option for the industry? I hope it is. Right now it is, because they're forced. And it's coming kind of back. It's kind of a back and forth with the constant, working dynamics, stuff like that. But I hope, and I see every now and then like an announcement where a company is doing everything remote, or we are going flexible from now on, or I think the industry is definitely changing, and subjectively I hope that every company adopts a remote work option if possible. Again, I'm not a business owner in that aspect or in any aspect where I know how that translates into a business. Like, it sounds great to hire everybody, but at the same time, what does that mean in terms of salary? If the company's in an expensive city or something, and then someone lives, I don't know where, is that person going to get salary, the salary compared to this expensive city or not? Labor laws. I think there's so many complicated, tricky things that I'm not smart enough to answer. So on a very wide level, convenience level, I would love a remote option everywhere. I think that would be really cool. I'm going to leave it at that. Harshal's back. Hello, here's my question. While doing a full body shot with facial performance, no dialogue, Is it necessary to polish the facial performance to a super high degree, even if the camera won't be closing in on the face? Thank you. Also, your channel is gold. Thank you. Partial is always way too nice. That's a good question. I would say if you do a full body shot with facial performance, because it's full body, your face is going to be much smaller on screen. So I would push the facial expression so it reads well, like a super close up. I don't know. Super close up, but if that, like if you're that close, you're going to see all this squishy stuff and moving things. But if you're really far away, like head like this tiny, that level of subtlety will be lost. So you need to exaggerate so it really reads, and no, you don't need to go into crazy facial polish in terms of like sticky lips on the sides and like shape language. I think it's on the broader side, but it needs to read better. Like simplify so that it reads quickly, because it's going to be the whole thing where it's the body and the face reading as one unit, if that makes sense. So yeah, that would be my answer to that. Panimation is asking, hey JD, I would say, what are tricks to animate the hands? Do you happen to have any videos dealing with hands? I do not, but I have it on my list. Posing and hands and fingers. I love doing that type of animation. It's great. In terms of tricks, he's whining. Where is he? Oh, he left for the door. Now he wants me to open the door. I'll answer this question. I'll pause and do the dog thing and then come back. Don't overcomplicate fingers. So you don't want something where the silhouette, like super, like where hands are like this, and it's just you hit 7 in Maya for the silhouette, or generally you want a clean silhouette. Like a classic thing with hands when they point is to do something more. Where was my hands? Like that, where you get a triangle shape. Like that's a classic thing. Or you have pairings of fingers like that. A lot of women in animation have that pairing for some reason. You're not going to do this because that gets into Star Trek, but it's just a nice grouping of fingers so that you don't have even gaps between fingers. You want it to be overcomplicated in terms of silhouette. Like that would be my trick in terms of like the visuals. When it comes to the mechanics, what I would do is I would have in your scene usually what I do when I don't have a library, I set up general poses. That could be gentle poses too, where you have your default, a close, you can have a relaxed hand, you can have a tense hand, you can have a fist, different kind of poses, and I do this on -1, -2, -3, and so on. And then when I animate and block things out, I can select that hand, middle mouse click, and then copy it over. So my blocking already has blocked out hands, because you don't want to do blocking where your fingers are like that. It just looks odd when everything is somewhat posed out, but then you have nothing on a face, nothing on hands. I would also block out general, like super basic facial expressions in a first blocking pass, and not 2 facials at the very end. Because if you have a shot where there's an emotional change, at least have someone in the whatever, happy, sad, at least have 2 expressions in your face. So for hands, I would do basic poses, and I usually just key the whole thing and have my poses there, and then I go into the shape language, polishing it, but also, if you hold something like this and you let go with the arm, it wouldn't just be this goes away, but it would be you let go, maybe this finger goes first and these 2, and then this, and then the arm moves. So you have a bit of a polish in terms of a grip. Even if you hold something, it wouldn't just be this, but it would be that with a slight adjustment. So I would look at, depending on the style of your animation, of course, you have to look at what kind of fidelity you want to put in terms of readjustments and polish and offsets in the fingers and stuff like that. So a lot of it is driven by the style, but these would be my tricks, my tips at least. The trick would just be to have your library ready in your scene before you animate, so you can quickly block that in, so you don't have to go, because the time-consuming thing, if you don't have a picker or anything, it's just your rig, depending on the pose, to find the controllers, and then to manually go and pull and do your posing. Some rigs have a controller where you can just move the whole thing. That's cool for quick blocking, but then when everything's on that controller, you're gonna have that controller, those keys in the graph editor, plus the separate controller to fine-tune this. So you have to kind of look at your workflow if you want to do a first rough pass using just that control that does everything, spread, fist, and everything, and then delete it all and redo it in terms of detail. I know that sounds time consuming, so you have to kind of look at the pros and cons of what does the rig supply, how does that work for you, what's your schedule, the style, and so on. That would be that. He's still whining. I'm gonna get the dog out. Alrighty. That's that. Camilo Egido. What is the best workflow to animate the spine? Thanks for all your work. Love it. Thank you for loving it. The best workflow to animate a spine, I think it really depends on your personal workflow and the rig. What I don't like, let's put it this way. What my workflow is, it tries to avoid using all the controllers so that you get into this spiny noodly twist of the spine. I prefer to go rough in terms of grabbing this section that can only compress so much and twist, because it's your rib cage, and do a lot with that. And then when that is done, use more controllers to have a nicer line of action, maybe some better twisting, and not too much in the stomach area. I try to keep everything within like a hard surface block in the chest area, and then add a controllers. Basically, the workflow to animate the spine is, to me, it's like the workflow with everything, where I try to use the least amount of controllers to showcase the most amount of information, and then look at what other controllers do I have to add more details. I don't want to use every controller from the get-go. It just gets too time consuming. It's too noodly. It's too complicated when you edit. Not my favorite thing. Manas Kakad. Again, I hope I pronounce all these names somewhat correct. I know I don't, but I hope it's not like painful to listen. Hey JD, wishing you a happy new year. Same, we are February 27th, Sunday once again. Firstly, I would like to appreciate all the efforts and time you put on to this channel. Well, you're very welcome. So that all the animators across the globe can learn new things and concepts. You're very welcome. My question is about weighted and non-weighted tangents in Graph Editor. When to use weighted tangents and when to use non-weighted tangents. It would be really helpful if you could share some tips or can guide me here. The sad answer is that I don't know, because I don't use weighted tangents. I don't like them. Actually, I just did, if you look at my channel, I just did 3 ball bouncing demos, and one I want to do something with the weighted tangents. I couldn't even get it to work. I didn't even know. I just blanked on like how. I thought you just click this and you can scale, and then nothing happened. That's how much I dislike them. Mainly because it comes from the fact that when you, at work, the old work, when you take over a shop, or you're given a shop for fix or whatever, and that person used weighted tangents, I don't know, in my experience, it has always been a pain to edit. I think that's where this all comes from. I prefer to set more keys and just have a bit more control over this versus 2 or 3 keys and those long tangents, and then you got sometimes some really messy ways for the end, and one is long and one is really short. And it's just, if you can work like that, totally fine. I'm not a fan, and it's such a pain to edit. Probably because I don't work with it. I would probably have a better, easier time if I would work with weighted tangents. I think in terms of when and to use and when not to use, to me it goes back into this whole workflow box where if this is how you prefer to work, then that's how you use it. And if you don't like to work with that, that's when you don't use it. Like, to me, I like to set more keys or just have minimal work with some tangents and break some tangents, and that's it. And I work more in terms of adding more keys and posing for timing changes. Like, I do offsets and stuff in the pose to change the feel and timing, versus only a minimal amount of keys and then do it all with curves with weighted tangents. That's just not, I've just never done that. I mean, I went through it as a student, and every now and then I tried. It's just not something that I liked, and that's why I never continued. So that would be a very non-helpful answer. So the question, I can't answer it in a way. Like, to me, it's a workflow situation, so you have to try it out. If it's something that you like, instead of setting a bunch of keys, you prefer doing all that tangent work, then it is for you. I hope that it's somewhat of an answer there. All right, so that is the end of that batch, because that was last parts that I didn't finish. And now I'm getting to the last few questions. Xavier Robertson. Hey JD, I have a question about lead and follow. I've noticed in a lot of your analysis clips, love them by the way, a great resource. Thank you so much for watching them. You comment on how moving an arm on smaller movements trickle out to the chest and the rest of the body. My confusion is that statement to me makes it seem as though the arm goes first, but shouldn't the chest move first, then the arm? The chest reaching its stopping point and holding in that position. Interesting. Unless some outside force is pulling the arm. Question mark. Or is that basically what you're saying and you just pointing out that there is still movement through the rest of the body when the arm moves? Sorry for the long question, haha. Don't worry, it's not long. I like those questions because it always forces me to explain things better. So basically, lead and follow. Like I'm not in the school of like sometimes you read documents about animation and in terms of acting and lead and follow where the eyes lead the action. The eyes look first and then the head. That to me is nonsense just because it depends. If you have something that grabs your attention, you might be focusing on this and you don't want to put your head away and you might look first and what's going on? Oh, what's over there? But you might have something where you want to look over there, but you're still focusing going, I don't know. Oh, so the head leads instead of the eyes. To me, lead and follow, it all depends on the character situation, the inputs, the reaction. Like there's so much where you can do something where if someone draws the attention, I'm not even going to go first with the head or the eye. I might go first with the hand and go, wait, what is it? Okay, so now I'm leading with the arm. It really all depends on the acting choices. So to me, there's no rule of, well, this goes first and this goes first. It all depends what you want to do and how your character is supposed to come across. Now, when it comes to body mechanics, my point is that when you move an arm, so the classic thing in early student work is that you move an arm, that you just move either FK or IK, the arm up. And if this doesn't have an autoclavicle thing, it's just going to be an arm like this. Kind of pops almost when I do this. But when you do that, and by like bringing your arm up, you're going to have an arm and then the shoulder goes up. But because I do this, you can see how my chest is moving. It's going a bit over this way. So when you move an arm, my trickle down, not theory, but a concept is that you move an arm, it's going to not just be that arm controller. You're going to have to move this. That's going to move the shoulder. Because you move the shoulder, me personally, I'm going to adjust in terms of my chest. But I don't want to just move the chest and leave my head all locked. It's going to be, if I look at you, I might compensate and now rotate the head back to stay there. If I do all of this, there's an overall weight shift that's going to put more pressure on my right butt cheek here, which is just going to lessen or bring down that side of the hip. And that's going to adjust my knee out a little bit and drag this one. So to me, every single body motion has an effect on the surrounding. So if I do this with the finger, you can see how much my wrist is moving. Because I do this, there's some stuff in the forearm and maybe a little bit in the upper arm and blah, 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 blah. Again, depending on style. You can do something where someone just does this and it's just the finger, nothing else moves. If that's what the style gets, you can get away with. But if you do something, for real, then that's not going to work. So again, as always, with all of this, all the animation techniques and mechanics and style and everything, look at what are you animating, what the style is. And that's going to also inform how you have to animate your character and the amount of detail you need to put in. But that will be my answer, if that's an answer. Rodrigo D.G. Batista, right? I don't know. I'm saying this. Well, I have a question. It's a beginner's question, but I think it's a valid question. I'm sure it is. I have a very difficult time understanding the whole concept of timing and spacing. I have always heard that they are two separate things, but whenever I look at the subject, I understand both as speed. So the question is, what is the clear difference between timing and spacing? It's a good question. I always use them together as well. Basically, the spacing is going to determine your timing in a way, but then at the same time, the timing is also going to be influencing the spacing. But if you have spacing that is evenly spaced out, that's going to be the movement of my hand. But if the spacing is small and then gets bigger and bigger, the timing is going to change because I'm talking on a frame by frame basis. So every frame, the spacing gets bigger. It's going to be, that's the move. It's small to big, and so on and so on. So to me, on a frame by frame basis, the spacing that you have is going to change the timing. But you can also say, well, I want the timing to be fast and then come to a slow stop. Well, then your spacing would be broad, spaced out, and then getting smaller, smaller, and smaller to do this. Hope that makes sense. So to me, they're both super linked. The timing will determine the spacing, and the spacing will determine the spicing, the timing. So for me, they're both, they're not the same, but to me, they go hand in hand. So again, is that answering the question? Maybe, hopefully. I think timing and spacing and contrast and all that stuff to me is just, this is almost like a side note. It's not really an answer. It's just that to me is more interesting and important than posing. And I'm only saying this because it always comes up with the students. Posing is super important for sure, but you can have horrible posing and great timing and it still works. But if you have great posing and the timing is horrible, it all falls apart. So to me, timing, I put that above everything. And again, to me, timing and spacing are the same thing. So if your timing has to be a certain way, then your spacing is going to be a certain way. And if your spacing is a certain way, that's going to be the certain timing. I don't know, that to me is you might go into like into all the details, but for me, it's all one informs the other, vice versa type of thing. That is tricky. Diviazre. I apologize. Nagisvaran. Sorry. Hello. When the character... I know I laughed after hello. As if this character's right there. Hello. When the characters have acting dialogues with walk, in which the walk is on base anim layer, and the acting pose is on another pose in another layer, when the walk is on passing position, but as per acting dialogue, the body pose has to go down, how to have the balance to it without affecting the passing position? That's an interesting question. Well, you know, it depends, yeah, if you're doing with layers or not. I think, to me, the acting, so your acting dialogue layer is going to override your base anim layer of the mechanics. And again, your workflow is going to change. Like if you're doing everything as one, obviously this doesn't apply, but you might like to pose something out and do your mechanics and the acting poses as one pass. So, you know, if the acting says I got to crouch down on that moment, that will be in your pose. Some people might prefer to just do the ground structure of the animation. So that layer is just the mechanics. I'm just doing my walk. All right, this is working, goes from A to B. So now I want to think about the acting performances and blah, blah, blah. And that's the second layer. But the thing is, that will be the ultimate determining pose and attitude and everything and performance of your character. So that is going to override your mechanics layer if you have it like that. So if there's a walk where someone just goes up and down, but then at one point in the acting it will be more crouch and like something in a pose like this, then you're gonna have to walk and then start to go down into that and then go back into this. So the acting layer is going to override the base anim layer. That will be my answer, if that is the question. How to balance it without affecting the passing pose? Yeah, I mean, it is going to affect the passing pose. I think that is my point. The balance is that, to me, there's no balance. You're going to have the mechanics layer, and then you have the acting layer, and the acting layer is going to override and overbalance the passing position, right? Because it's going to be ultimately what you're acting, what you want to act out is going to be the final attitude, pose, product, all that good stuff of your character for the scene. Hope that makes sense. That's basically what I said at the very end of every question, and it is. I hope it all makes sense. It makes sense in my head, but I don't know. Okay, next up, I have to check on the dog. Dog is always around. Maria Lopez is asking, hi JD. First, I'd like to say that your YouTube channel is awesome, and I'm sure if you made one on Twitch, it'd be awesome too. That's very generous of you. Thank you. Twitch? It'd be cool. I just don't think my schedule works where I can find time to live stream apart from like 5 a.m. and then who is up at 5 a.m. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think that Twitch is going to happen anytime soon. It would be kind of fun though. Now the question. How do you know when to ask for a raise of salary at a company? Okay, that's totally different than Twitch. Yes. I mean, how do you know it's a good time and make sure they won't look at you with bad eyes for asking so? Thank you, and I love your content. Well, thank you again. Thank you for, I love that you love the content. Asking for a raise, subjectively. Well, first is don't ask when you need more money. As in, you just got a car, you got a second car, you bought a computer. I mean, there's some stuff where your personal lifestyle does not determine the salary. That's, at least I would not go in with that, you know, with that, not condition, but kind of like the reasoning for a raise. I think it's, you have to look at the performance at work. Like, how do you animate? What else do you do? Do you have gain other skills in terms of other disciplines? Can you do more at a company, or has your level in terms of animation gone up for a while? Are you getting more work that's more complicated? Do you have more responsibilities at work? So basically, when you started where you're at now, what would you describe your job at the beginning and now? What is your job description? You feel like you're doing a lot more now in terms of either responsibilities or your quality and all that good stuff, then I feel like then it's okay to ask for a raise. It's not just willy-nilly because you feel like it or you need more money. It's more that I am more valuable now than before. I can contribute more. I have more responsibilities. And if I compare myself to someone else who does the same thing and they have a different job title and a different, salary range attached to that, that you can say, well, then I feel like it will be my turn to ask for a raise then as well, because I'm at that same level. Again, those negotiations are always tricky and weird, and companies going to have many reasons why not to give you a raise, and probably also many reasons yes to give it to you. I would also see the difference between a raise with a promotion, again depending on how much how much more you're doing at the company, versus, and this is trickier, versus like every year, the cost of living goes up every year everywhere, but your salary doesn't go automatically up. So in a way, you have to kind of look at, are you doing a lot more and that's a promotion and a raise like that? Or is it a salary adjustment based on the surrounding elements? I think that's also fair to ask. Because if you're going somewhere for 5 years, you've never had a cost of living increase, but then the company, the city or whatever you're in gets more expensive, your salary just can't match this. And it's just a tricky thing to negotiate if you ask you for more money because of, again, surrounding cost increases versus performance. So I don't know. I think there are many things to incorporate and think about, but the main thing I would say is when you feel like you're doing a lot more than you did before and you're doing something that someone else is doing and who has another title and more money associated with that, I think then it's for sure an okay time to ask. Bara Abu Dair, I hope again. Hi JD, Happy New Year. Happy New Year to you too. We are in February. Could you explain how the 1s and 2s animation in the movie Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse? Still can't grasp it well, thank you. Well, basically 1s and 2s is 1s you animate, a new set of poses on every frame. It's almost like from the 2D back in the day, almost say it's 2D still around. And 2s is like you have a new pose every 2 frames. So in a way, you won't animate 24 frames a second, you animate 12 frames a second if your base is 24 frames. But in Spider-Verse, it's trickier because you might have a character be animated on 2, so every 2 frames there's a new pose, while the camera is on 1s to make it smooth. The camera on 2s gets very choppy, it's kind of tricky. But even then, some of the animation, you might have one character on 2s and one character on 1s, or one character on 1s that goes into 2s and back into 1s. It's a bit all over the place, and that's just the style, which I think is awesome. I love it. And I've actually never animated that, which I really want to. But the understanding is that you have a key and a pose every frame versus every 2 frames. So you hold one pose for another frame and then you switch over. This is why it can be funky looking when you have a smooth looking camera move on 1s while the character stays put, but the camera continues, then the character pops into the next position because it's always in a way a frame behind. So you have to kind of look at that if you do both. But anyway, that would be my answer. What you should definitely do is just Google making of Spider-Verse, because there's a bunch of stuff out there and they talk about that in much more detail with visual examples. So I would check that and not ask an idiot like me. So I would go to the pros who worked on it. Adriano C. Hey Jean, it's Jean-Denis, JD. Happy New Year. Happy New Year to you as well. I hope all is well and you enjoyed some well-deserved time off. I did. So my question would have to be, when do you know that you did too much work, not losing the quality or anything? Is that a good thing to have quantity, or is it just good to get a shot on the first try and build on it? Any suggestion would be good. Thanks in advance. I think I remember asking a bunch of follow-up questions on this because I wasn't quite sure what that meant. And the thing is, it's a tricky thing to answer because it really all depends on your expectations, your demands on yourself, who you're working for, the project schedule and deadline, and your supervisor, if you're in a position where you're an underling, and your supervisor's expectation, the client's expectations of work. What do I mean by this? It's basically, if you're working on your own shop, you can work forever. You're your own client in a way, right? And you will determine when it's good enough. There also comes a point where it's already so good that if you make any more changes, they're going to be so incremental and small that it might be a waste of time because you're not going to is it really better or is it just different? Because you have to also look at that world of you make changes and it's basically just different but not better. If you work for someone, like let's say you have a lead or a supervisor above you, they will also determine at one point you need to stop because they will think this is good enough, it's fine. Because they have to show it to a client. The client will also determine this is good, this is final, we're done, right? There's always someone, if you work for someone, there's always someone above you, like not really above you, but someone that will, in the chain, in the hierarchy, will have to decide when this is done. Then there's also time and budget. Even though everybody on the team would love to continue, you just don't have time anymore. The deadline is today, 3 o'clock. So the quality is what it is at that time. Then you have to think in terms of, and this is tricky, what this is for. So if you're making a movie or a TV show, whatever, the general audience, like if it's something for like 5-year-olds, they're not going to see the difference between like an 80% done shot and a 100% done shot. They might feel it, but they really can't put that into a bigger context, and that they won't really care. The older people get and the more knowledge they have about the subject, if people know about animation, they will be able to tell. But the general audience, I feel like they sometimes we noodle things forever and they will never be able to tell the difference. Now, I don't mind, because the thing is, if I say our as in animators, if our standard is 100%, but the audience only gets 80%, that sounds super weird, but I hope that makes sense. I wouldn't lower the animator standard to 80%, because then after a while, the audience goes down to 60%, but whatever. Like the quality just goes down and down and down. I'm okay putting in a bunch of detail and just really crafting the crap out of the shot if possible, even though a big chunk or even half or whatever will never notice the difference. Because I like to push myself, get better at it, and keep a certain level of quality and move that forward, and hopefully teach that in my classes, whatever. Just keep going with that versus, yeah, but the general audience only sees this, why should we go further? And then it erodes and gets worse and worse and worse. So that would be hopefully the answer. I've also somewhat, I think, answered it in the replies there, but yeah. And the thing is, yeah, I mean, there comes a point where you keep working and the quality will not improve. The losing the quality aspect there is that because if you don't have feedback and you just work on your own, you just worked on it for too long. Like your eyes are not fresh enough to really see the differences if it gets better. And even within a team, if everybody looks at the same thing over and over and over, everybody gets used to the shot, and then things just become different versus better. So yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that. It's probably a bigger thing to unpack in terms of how far should you take your craft and who is it for and does it matter and all that good stuff. Be an interesting discussion. Michela De Longis. Michela De Longis? Again, sorry. Hi JD, I hope you enjoyed the holidays. I did. Can you please explain how to ease in and out of camera movements smoothly in a graph editor? Timing camera moves and tips on picking focal lengths. Also, any advice or tips for young aspiring previs and layout artists that should watch/read to grow in that aspect of the pipeline. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure to watch your videos. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure to know that you're finding pleasure in watching my videos. Now, in terms of this, and I said this before, this is sadly like a year and a half old, my first camera series. I had this whole thing planned out. I did part 1, and then I did part 2, and then part 2 was so boring. It was 45 minutes long. It was so boring. And I never got into editing it. I think it's so bad and so dry. I need to redo the whole thing. And it's just, I'm cramming in a lot into part 2. Part 2 is all about the composition, the different ways of, like, where do you put your camera? How does that mean in terms of composition? Not movement. Camera movement will be part 3. But part 1 was all about the lenses, and picking focal lengths was more in part 1. I would check out that. Part 2 is going to be where do you place the camera, and just kind of the compositional aspect of that. And then 3 goes, well, once you have that, crane, steady, like there are so many things about camera stuff that I want to talk about. So if I go one by one, explain how to ease in and out of camera moves smoothly. So you're going to have to decide what camera you're using. Not in Maya, but what camera you're emulating. In your scene, is someone holding a cell phone? Or is it a bigger camera? Is it like something really big you have on your shoulder? Is it something that's on a track, on a dolly, something where multiple people have to push? Because all of that is going to change the weight. Again, this if you film something with this, you can have a lot of, unless you have a stabilizer, which these guys have by now. But if you move around, this is so small. It's like my pen. The smaller the object, the more it's going to inherit imperfections and movement from what you're holding. My fingers, my body, everything. Same thing with this. If I walk like that, if I have a ginormous camera and it's on a steady cam, it's going to absorb everything. It's like if you're on a gimbal, it's going to smooth out things. If you have a ginormous camera where multiple people have to push it, then when a camera is staying still and starting to move, that's going to take a little bit and then it gets going, but it also won't stop. Versus this, where I can go fast and just stop. You can't do this with a ginormous IMAX camera, even though IMAX cameras are getting smaller, much smaller actually. So you have to look at who is holding the camera, what type of camera, what's the camera move. All of that will determine your ease in and out in terms of animation. And then how do you do that? Well, then you just set keys and adjust your curves, and you're going to emulate the feeling of a little bit of wobble there, or whatever you want to do. I really liked, which I'm going to reference in the camera clip, but The Witness, I think that was called in the Netflix show, where there's a shot, camera-wise, I really like that episode, where there's a hallway shot, the camera goes forward, stops, I think the cab arrives, she gets out, and the camera goes back. And the weight and how it stops and then returns, I think is really cool. But anyway, I'll talk more about that. I have my wife calling, so I'm going to pause this. Hold on. Yes. All right. I hope that makes sense in terms of ease in and out. Timing, camera moves, tips on picking focal lengths. That's in the part 1. Also advice, well, since you're asking just quickly here, the Maya default is a 35mm, so be careful when you have a very close up, because that's going to have some distortion. If you move the head around, it's going to have that weird distort. So you're going to be more on the 50, 60, 70, 80, depending on how real you want to be with the actual numbers. But I will go on a longer lens than a wide one when you have close-up, stuff like that. And tips on young, aspiring, previous or layout artists that would watch and read to grow in that aspect pipeline. It's somewhere buried, actually, right there. There's a visual. I'll put it in the description. There's a visual language thing. Hold on. Let me unpack the books there. It's heavier than I thought. I'm a big fan of this one. I'll put the link in the description. This one's really great. I love it. I think the person who wrote this came to ILM one point to do a lecture. It was so cool. I love it. I believe this is the older version. If you have this, also works with all the reflections, but it's the older version. Then you get into detail-y stuff with this. Shot by shot, that's interesting. They also have, again, so reflection-y cinematic motion. And then if you want to go into more detail, the 5 C's of cinematography. I'm a big fan of this. This is not exactly previous, but it's all about composition, and there's a volume 2. Oh, and then in that aspect, you also have frame perspective 1 and 2. Oh, I'll talk about these in the future. I like, material like this that talks about composition. When it comes to actually moving camera stuff, I would just try to look at as many making ofs as you can. There's a bit less nowadays, but back in the day, there were really great making ofs. So I would look at any material where they do talk about the blocking of the camera and the staging with the people and all that stuff. Just in terms of for camera language and camera movement. And in terms of previs, then look out for just any demo reel you can find online about previs and like what those shots look like, and just it's more about like learning through absorption and just kind of what have other people done. But I don't have a specific book or anything that this is previs or layout. Now, that being said, if you want to know more generally about the kind of the feature animation side of layouts, the happy hour, the animation happy hour, check out, I don't know if it's the latest one. I think there are 2 parts where they have veterans in terms of layout and previs. It was really interesting, so I would highly recommend that podcast episode, and then expand from that, because you have previs, you have layouts, but it all depends. It can be different in terms of the tracking, the match moving, all the lenses, but then previs goes more into animation. We also do, or I used to do also post-viz, where it's already in production, but they got to find something new. And then you kind of do a post-viz version where it's not exactly previous assets. It's more production assets, but it's still more previously, but we call it post-viz. There's a bunch of stuff that can expand out of that almost pre-animation pipeline position, whatever that makes sense. So that's what I would do. That makes sense. But I should do, I mean, my camera series will cover a lot, but I wasn't going to go into previs and layouts in terms of like the specific disciplines, mainly because that's not my job. I have done stuff, but that's not, you know, that's not my career thing where I go. So I don't want to presume that I know enough to talk about that. So I would look at other artists who hopefully have a channel somewhere or material for that. Depu, Vijayan, sorry. Hi JD. Hi. Can you share your experience working on the Transformers movies? How did you plan and animated the complex transforming shots? Thanks. I can't, and I did not. That's my answer. Just because I can't really talk about work in terms of details and shows. All I can tell you as a whole, in terms of experience, is that the Transformers movies were always tough in terms of animation because the complexity of the mechanics and everything, and the heavy rigs and everything was always tough to work on. But because of that, always super rewarding because you always learn so much. There was always so much to do and complicated, and it really pushed you in terms of reference and mechanics and weight and physical like composition, like the previous aspect that we just talked about there, where we had to come up with shots. Is always really cool. I'm not a massive fan of the movies, dare I say. Back in the day, I liked 1. I don't know if I still like it. 2 was a big disappointment just because we had so much fun working on it. And the sequences were so cool. And then when I watched the whole thing as a whole, I just wasn't super into it. And it kind of continued, 3 and 4. I don't think I've seen the last one. And I've only seen bits and pieces of Bumblebee, which looked really cool. I did work on one shot on Bumblebee. But I don't know, I mean, I watched Transformers as a kid, the cartoons, but I wasn't massively into it. That's why I'm not like following, as opposed to like Star Wars, where again, quality goes up and down, but I'm such a fan, Star Wars and Star Trek, that I will watch anything. So, and then planning and animating the complex transforming shots is that was a special group of people. Sometimes this like a technical person, but sometimes also specific animators that always did the transformations, and I wasn't one of them. I only did, I believe, 1 shot, 2 maybe, with transformations, and they weren't huge. They weren't like the prime close-up where the camera goes all the way up and everything changes. It was like a fast run, jump into a plane flying away, that type of stuff. Cheated. I think I had 2 shots maybe. So yeah, can't really talk about that. So unfortunately, after a month, that's a horrible answer to maybe something you wanted to know. But then again, making of, there's a bunch of people who've talked about that. There's so much stuff online. I would definitely check there if you want to know more details about the production and everything. But that's probably all I can say. And again, the experience, they're tough to work on, but I like them just because it always moves you forward. You always end up better as an animator after a Transformers movie. That's all I can say. They're just really tough to work on, and yeah, they push you. It's great. Now the question about the client is always a different kind of question, and you know, the team is always fun, but yeah, it's tough and it's great. Probably like the heavy rigs are always tricky. When you have to animate for any show, when you have a rig that's heavy and you can't scrub in real time, or you have to do facial stuff and it just gets very time consuming, that's a very tricky thing. It's a bummer. Robert, can you make a video on constraints? I sure can, and it's on my list, and the list is very long. I feel like I always say it's on my list, but like, really, is it though? It really is. It's just the time consuming aspect of actually opening my and doing stuff versus talking. That's why my FNAs are always more talking than demoing. It's because it's faster to do, because I'm just so busy. But yes, I can. I kind of having it working, but it's causing an issue when I try to connect 2 hands. Can you make one showing how you handle this issue? Yeah, I will. It's because I want to do one where it's not the theoretical, but kind of like the tools that you have within Maya. But then, like you say here, what's the practical application and what are the tricks? And especially something that comes up every time for every student in every class is the switching between IK, FK, or just like when do you do it? How do you avoid pops when the rig doesn't have an IK, FK match type of thing? How do you hide the transition between the constraints on and off? Stuff like that. I do want to put into shots. But yeah, So yes, and I believe I answered that already in typing form. Rodrigo, oh, he has a second question. Rodrigo with a second question. Can I ask a second question? Yes, you can. If I could, I would also like to ask what causes an animation to have that floating appearance and how to avoid it. Thanks for the space to clear my doubts. I like that ending. No doubt there. Floaty appearance. I think it comes down to many things, but it goes back to the timing spacing type of thing in your curves, but you don't want your character like even timing and then with very even ease in and out and just everything is always splined. That gives you that kind of floaty, ghost-like type of floating appearance. You have to kind of look at what point do you want to hold the character to be really still. When you have something where it's a moving hold, is it going to be, and then you hold, and then go down? Like how small is that hold into something faster? Even like the texture in something where if I move my arm up, is it just going to be with an arc, just this, or is it going to be that? Like when you have something slow, fast. So just kind of, you have to kind of look at the variation of your timing and spacing so that it's not a simple A to B. But all of that should always be driven by the character, where the character is, the influences, the situation, and then the motivation, and blah, 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 right? So if someone is tired versus someone is happy, that movement's already going to be different. So that will always determine your movement. But even if you know that the character is happy or sad or whatever, you can still end up with floaty floaty animation. Again, that is, to me, because of there's not enough texture and variation in timing, not enough contrast, not enough holds. The ease ins and outs are too even. There's just that fine-tuning aspect of animation where you want to give it that little extra spice to the timing. If that's an answer, I mean, how do you avoid it? It's that. I mean, a practical thing would be to observe, obviously, act things out so you know how it feels. Film reference, film yourself, find reference. And I think in terms of practice, it's okay to copy reference. Don't put it on your reel, but film something and then rotoscope it just so you can see this move. How does that translate into my keys in the graph editor? Oh, this is what the graph editor looks like when something moves like that. Then trash that scene and then start over, do something else. But in terms of learning, I think it's important that you have a kind of a visual understanding and a memory almost of, if I move something like this, the curve is going to look like that. So if I want it to be even or fast or stuttery, this is how you would animate it. And then after a while, at least I'm at a point where when you animate something, and I know what the curve is going to look like when something has to move a certain way. That doesn't mean I can just animate everything in one pass and it's great. That's not how good I am. But you do get better at it where you start seeing a pattern in curves, and you know that if you have two keys and you just spline it, you're going to have that spline bump, but maybe that's okay because you want that little bit of an overshoot. So there's a familiarity with your keys and the splines and everything after years of working in this. So how to avoid it? Again, reference, act things out, just observe and look at how a movement translates into your curves and the keys. And then go from there. So you get familiar with what it's supposed to look like. And just definitely avoid just animating, even timing, and just hitting spline. Like that's the worst you can do, but then it's going to be all floaty. Danielle, crochet art. I don't know. I feel like I should not even try. Danielle, I'm gonna leave that at Danielle. Hey JD, can you explain to me what is a standard working week inside an animation studio? Like how many working hours, how often do you talk with directors to review the shots, etc.? That really all depends on the studio and TV, movie, feature, VFX, all that stuff. ILM used to be, I say used to because I'm not there anymore, 40 hours a week, standard week. And then normal production might bump it to 45. So 40 hours regular pay, 5 hours overtime if you're hourly. And if you're salary, didn't know. You might have, I think New Zealand has, a base hours, like 50. Don't quote me on this. I don't know. I think maybe it used to be 60. Maybe it's 50 now or 55. Again, each studio, different country, blah, 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 has a different base hour weeks as a standard working week. So it could be 40, 45, something. So you have to kind of research where you live. And then how many working hours? I mean, that will depend on your position and what you're working on in a way. It's not going to be, if you have a 9-hour day, not counting in lunch, so that would be 10-hour day. Let's say 9 hours of work. you're not going to animate 9 hours. And anybody watches, really? Why not? Because there's a good chance you're gonna have dailies. So however long dailies are, that's an hour or half an hour you're not gonna animate, right? You're probably gonna have 15 to half an hour total a day ergo breaks, bathroom breaks. I mean, like that's gonna happen. And then you might have outside of dailies, desk reviews. Maybe someone who the client comes in, the director, if you feature it, might be more one-on-one. You might have other meetings, not just dailies, but meetings. So if you're in the higher position, you might have asset meetings, you might have design meetings. Currently, right now, as an Anim Soup at Warner's, we have a bunch of meetings about, I don't know what I can say, but it's a bunch of meetings about everything, right? It could be scripts, design, assets, animation. So it's not like the more you oversee things, the more you're going to be involved in more meetings, which means the less time you'll be animating. Versus if you are a junior animator and you're just starting, chances are all you're going to do is sit in dailies and then animate. And that's that. And then it's also up to you to kind of, to balance your it's not work-life, but it's kind of like your work balance, as in you also can't just animate 8 hours a day every day. You might burn out. So you're going to take a break. You're going to stop and then go to your neighbor, your, cafeteria, have lunch, talk to someone, or go to the kitchen and talk to that. So if you end up talking for half an hour, you're going to make up that half an hour. You can't just bill it, right? So your day will stretch. But it's important that you do take breaks when you can within limits, so it doesn't, interfere with deadlines and the project and blah, blah, blah. But as you animate, you will learn how to pace yourself, and I can do this a 5-hour stretch, an 8-hour stretch, a 2-hour stretch. And that's, so your day, again, your working hours is going to be so flexible and different depending on where you work, how you work, what city, what country, what project, TV, feature, games, all that stuff. It's difficult. There's not one answer to this. So I'll leave it at that. Kaito Lao is asking, hi Jenny, do you have some tips for camera animations, speziell, German, specifically for action scenes or a fight? When I animate the camera in fights, it looks often boring or confusing. Interesting. And I do have tips for camera animation. That's going to be part, plus 3 is movement, but it's not animation. So animation is going to be part 4, 5, or 6, where the specific things you have to pay attention to. For instance, if you have a moving camera, right? If you pan, tilt, pan, even though everybody says pan for everything. So if you pan over and let's say you have a character moving this way and you're adding handheld to the camera, so you have tilt and pan keys that do some imperfections. You want to take out the ones in Y because you don't want to have a pan and on top of that imperfections that go left and right, because then your pan is all stuttery. It's going to be a bit more up and down and maybe in Z, but less in Y. So these are kind of the camera animation things you have to think about when you animate cameras. Now, when it comes to fights, it really all depends. I mean, you can have a static camera with a little bit of movement, maybe a translate, so that you have foreground elements that go past camera faster than other ones that are for further distance. But maybe your fight is far away and then gets closer to the lens. So you might have some depth that way where the objects in the scene are changing distance. That can be dynamic. It doesn't always have to be the camera move. You have to look at the lenses. So if you have a wide lens, you move around, it's going to be a lot of changing things, the perspective changes, blah, blah, blah. Versus if you have a really long lens and you move the camera, you might not see anything really moving because the lens is too long. So, I mean, how do I answer this? Is it one big shot? Then you have to look at how you have not super complicated camera moves, but then it gets to like, whoa, what's going on? Especially when you have translates in there. I would keep it more rotates with one like overriding translate, and then stage it with the characters in your scene getting closer and further away, and foreground elements, the set, stuff like that. And the other way is to not have a long scene, but maybe a 10-second shot that's cut into 3 or 4 shots. And then you can play with wide and close and stuff like that. And also lenses being different. So I think the main answer would be depends what you want to get across in your shot. Like what's more important, the camera move or the characters fighting? Is it kind of like a floaty magic cam where it's just observing with some cool angles and speed, but it doesn't inherit camera shakes because of characters falling close to camera, stuff like that. Do you want to be hands-on, where an action scene where a creature maybe bumps into the camera then goes away and shakes and stuff like that? It really all depends what you want to do with it. I wouldn't overcomplicate things, since we're speaking of Transformers. There's a lot of 360 cameras, a lot of overcomplicated stuff where sometimes it can be a bit too much. So I would look at the action needs to be interesting so that your camera doesn't overcompensate for boring content, right? So the action is cool, and then you can have, I would just do a cool action and then think in terms of progression where something maybe starts far away, gets close to far away, or both for contrast. An overriding move with cool handheld and more rotation and translate. And then all that within a set where maybe some stuff can fly by or get close by for some parallax and more like foreground, midground, background levels of interest. If that makes sense. That's what I would do. Lazy Animator is saying, hello, I have a question regarding feedbacks. I was wondering something. If I make an animation shot and I ask for feedback on it from you, my mentor, or any other fellow animators in community, then can I really call it my shot because I could never ever reach that level of polish without them? That's a good question. It all depends. That's my BS answer. It really all depends. I mean, if you work somewhere, it's going to be rare that everything is just you, because you're going to present the shot. Even then, you might get a shot turnover or a, whatever company, already companies call the turnovers or whatever it's called. So you might get already direction from whoever, client, soup, whatever. This is the composition, the characters. This is what they want you to do in the shot. So then it's already not your idea. You know what I mean? Like, you're already being told what to do. Then you go through the process of revisions in dailies with other people. And then client, maybe a supervisor or like a CG supervisor, and then maybe an overall company supervisor. There's so many layers of feedback that you can get. So yeah, it gets tricky. You might, at the end, not be responsible for the ideas in it, but you will be responsible for the animation in it, the quality, the weight, and all that stuff. So you kind of look at what's more important to you. In terms of when you say polish, I mean, you're always going to learn. Even the best animators are still going to show stuff to other people, and they might have some comments. So yes, you're always going to have a pollution of outside feedback that's going to change your shot. So if you feel like, if you didn't do the shot in a vacuum at home by yourself with no feedback, and that's the shot, and everything else is not you, why not? I think that's totally valid. I think that's very picky, and but in a way true. So if I, for instance, I don't know, even now when I do stuff at home, I ask my wife. I'm not completely animating in a vacuum. I think that last one I did, the oh no, the table is broken, was really just something quick I wanted to do to learn renders, and that was all me. Did I ask my wife? I'm sure I did, but that was more one where I was like, I'm gonna just do something, just because I wanted to go through certain stages of learning something else. It wasn't a super focus on animation. Versus if I'd be at work animating whatever, Star Wars, Star Trek, then it would be through all those layers of feedback. So yeah, so at the end, I think the idea, I wouldn't say that's my shot unless you're in layout or previs where that originates, and like you're the one that created the camera move and the content of like what's going on in there. But even then, when we get previs, sometimes we change it. We have to, because the client had some new ideas. So even then, a previous artist might not have full ownership over the idea. The animation might be different, but the creative aspect of the shot could be different. So it's tricky. I think it's an interesting question, and is it still your shot? Technically not, if you want to be super picky in terms of all the feedback. If you feel like, well, had I done this by myself alone, it wouldn't look that good. So people help me, so it's not really my shot. Yeah, I can see that. I'm not that picky though. I mean, it's still ultimately, you can get a lot of feedback and still do a crappy job in terms of animating. Ultimately, you're still interpreting and taking all those pieces of information and then animating that. If someone starts animating for you, then it gets kind of wonky there. But ultimately, if you have a first year student, you can give them all the information in the world, but the shot's probably still going to look not good because it's just they're learning. They're not quite there yet. So I think that learning process is everywhere, and that's why I kind of brush that aside as in like, well, we're all getting feedback somewhere from something, from someone. So to be that picky, then no one could ever own anything anywhere, which maybe why not? I don't know. I think this is a great question with broader implications and an interesting roundtable question with other people. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. I think that's the last question too. Lazy animator, that was my lazy answer. Yeah, how long is this? 1 hour and 4 minutes. Well, with the edits and the dog, maybe just an hour, maybe, I don't know. But I think that's it. I got all those questions from that first YouTube clip, all of the part 2 and 3, or 1, 2, and 3, or this coming 3. I answered in the comments, so the same thing here. I don't think any of these have been added or will warrant a part 4. So next one, I don't know, maybe in 6 months or a year or something, I'll do another Q&A. These are always fun. I like these. Just maybe I'll do a live Q&A. I've never done that either. I don't know how many people would join in, and especially at what time I would do it, because I have a day job, I'm busy. So I don't know, it would be early in the morning, and who is around that early? So going all the way back to that Twitch thing, all those live things, tricky to do. I just don't have, I'm very scheduled out, which I like the way it is. So I'm not sure how I would change it. But that's it. So if you're still watching or listening after an hour, as it says here, thank you. I appreciate the patience, of course. Was kind of busy last couple of weeks with school and everything else and work. So hopefully by next week, my upload schedule will be going back and doing more reviews and re-reviews and lectures and F&As, or not. We'll see. That's the beauty of the channel. I can do whatever I want in terms of the schedule. And that's it. So thank you for listening and watching. I will stop it right there, and hopefully I'll see you, or you can listen to me in the next clip. If that made sense. English? I don't know. Thank you.